Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Austin-Goodall. I'm from the IMechE. I'll be moderating this webinar, which will be delivered by our colleague Sally. Welcome to those who've turned up early. It's due to start at 12:30. Just a brief announcement. You should be able to see the slide on the screen. If you can have a think about the question that Sally's put up there and put your thoughts down. If you could use the chat box to do that, that can be found if it's not on the screen. On the right-hand side, you should have a tab with an arrow. If you click on that and click on Attendee Chat, you'll then be able to chat with everyone. Can we ask you to use this for any questions? What we'll be doing as we go through the presentation is I'll be collating questions, and Sally will do a Q&A session towards the end for any questions or statements or anything that you guys need to know. So please feel free to introduce yourself, give your thoughts on the question on the screen. I'll do this announcement probably a couple of more times before 12:30, and we'll start promptly on time at 12:30. And I shall speak to you all in due course. Thank you for turning up early. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Austin-Goodall. I'll be moderating this webinar, which will be delivered by my colleague Sally. We're due to start at 12:30. I just want to thank you, those of you who turned up early. As you can see, the first slide, there is a thought or a question statement that Sally has put on the screen. If you could give me your thoughts or give us your thoughts on that, also introduce yourself. You can do this via the chat box. If you can't see the chat box on your screen, you should see a tab on the right-hand side of the Media Hub. If you click on that, that will pop out a menu. If you can click on Attendee Chat, within that chat, you can just add in any statements and introduce yourself. You can also ask any questions. Sally will be running a Q&A session at the end of the presentation, which I will then collate all the questions as we move through. Again, thank you all for turning up early. I'll probably do this announcement again in about 5 minutes' time, and then we're due to start at 12:30. Thank you all for attending early. Good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks for you all joining this webinar on mental health. My name is Rob Austin-Goodall. I'll be moderating this webinar, which will be delivered by my colleague Sally. We're due to start at 12:30 promptly. In the meantime, if you can see the first slide there's a statement that Sally's put up. Please, by all means, type your thoughts into the chat box. Also introduce yourself. If you can't see the chat box, you'll find it on the tab on the right hand side. If you look at the right hand side of your screen, you should be a tab. If you click on that tab, it will open up a menu that should then have attendee chat. If you click on that, you can then type in your introductions, answer to the statement. We'll also be using this as we go through the webinar for any questions. Sally will do a Q&A session at the end. I will collate any of the questions that come through, and we'll answer as many as we can at the end. Thank you for those who've already gone the chat box: Alison, Charles, Russell, George, Anne, Douglas. Please, by all means, the rest of you, please input your thoughts onto that. Again, use it for any questions moving forward. If you have any technical difficulties as well, please put those in the chat box. My colleague Kirsty is here to answer any technical issues on sound or viewing the slides and so on and so forth. We've got about 3 or 4 minutes to go, so I'll go offline now and then I'll come back on at 12:30 to start the session. Thank you again for attending early. Good afternoon, everyone. Many thanks for you joining our Mental Health Initiatives webinar. My name is Rob Austin-Goodall. I work for the IMechE and I'll be moderating this session. I'll be handing over to Sally, my colleague Sally, to deliver the training session shortly. In the meantime, for those who have joined us recently, there is a chat facility within this webinar. If you can't see it on the screen, it's located on the tab. If you see a tab on the right-hand side of your screen, click on that, you'll get a menu. If you click on attendee chat, you can then add your thoughts and any questions you have within the chat box. There are a number of people who've done that already, and many thanks for you for doing that. As we go through the session, we'll do a Q&A session at the end. If you can put any questions you have in the chat box, what I'll do, I'll collate them and we'll get to as many as we can at the end of the session. Just move on to the next slide to introduce myself properly. That's me, Rob. Sally, who will be delivering the session. And if I hand over to Sally now, she'll be able to then continue on with the webinar. Sally.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Rob. And a big warm welcome to everyone who has joined this webinar. And thank you for your introductions too and your responses and thoughts about this opening statement that we presented. Some really insightful thoughts there. And I'm absolutely delighted to be with you today for the next 45 minutes to an hour looking at the real return on investment from mental health initiatives. A very brief introduction about myself. I'm Sally Desborough and I'm the founder of Your Wellbeing Hub, which is a mental health awareness training company. I'm newly associated with IMechE, which I'm delighted about and hugely excited to be part of the team delivering mental health awareness and mental health first aid training. Now, my background's actually in HR. I started working in HR back in 2008, and I started the transition into the health and wellbeing sector, specifically mental health training, in 2017 when I took the opportunity to become a mental health first aid training instructor. So with my background in HR, up to that point in 2017 and beyond that actually, mental health conversations were almost a daily occurrence in my line of work. So supporting employees in the workplace with various health challenges, whether those were physical or mental health related, or actually sometimes a combination of the two, and coaching managers through having conversations with employees experiencing a difficult time. And when I think back to, the last organisation that I worked for, probably about 50% of all health cases related to mental illness or mental health issues. So the prevalence and impacts of this on people was very apparent. And in my day-to-day role, very much part of, people's support network, if they're in the workplace, experiencing difficulty, ensuring that they're appropriately supported, but also sometimes having those conversations and saying, actually, it might be wise to go and speak to your GP, talk about how you're feeling, get some advice. And if you get signed off, we'll absolutely support you in returning to work both appropriately and safely. Not only that, but I also have my own personal experience of mental illness, which I'm very open about talking about. So in 2016, I was diagnosed with severe mental illness. And at that time, I suppose I really noticed how quiet the air was, for want of a better term, how quiet the air was around talking about mental health issues and mental illness. And at that time, it almost felt unsafe to talk about what I was experiencing. And I think that experience really ignited a spark in me, wanting to do more to raise awareness and encourage those conversations. I'm just like anybody else and never imagined I'd find myself in that position. So that really kind of was a driving force behind me doing what I do now. And so I commit all my time to trying to raise awareness through delivery of different mental health programs. And I left the corporate HR world at the end of last year. So from the 1st of January this year, this has really been my focus. So I am accredited by Mental Health First Aid England to deliver their courses and by extension the Royal Society for Public Health. So that's a little bit about me and my introduction. So thinking about our agenda for today, we want to start exploring and talking about why mental health awareness is now more important than ever. We know that mental health is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds, and we're really going to underpin a lot of this content and this section with some data and insights to really see that indicative picture of the state of people's mental health in the UK and globally as well, and look at and visit the benefits of increasing our own awareness too. Considering how important mental health conversations are, both personally and professionally, we also want to start exploring how we can make mental health conversations easier. Additionally, giving you some top tips on how to start positive and empowering mental health related conversations at work. It is so common for us to worry about saying the wrong thing that we often don't say anything at all. So we'll be giving you some fundamentals today that you can take away and apply. And as Rob has said, if you've got questions as we go through the content, please pop those in the chat, and we will be visiting those at the end of this webinar. So why is mental health awareness now more important than ever? It's absolutely fair to say that mental health is high on people's agenda, as I've already mentioned, certainly more so as a result of the events of this year. And we live in constant uncertainty and change, but 2020 has really intensified that. This year's events have made that experience much more intense. And it's fair to say, I think, that this is likely to continue at least over the coming months into 2021. I've said it many a time this year that we're all in the same storm, but we're all in different boats. I'm not going to take credit for that. I didn't come up with that myself, but it's something that I've heard a lot this year, whereby we are all experiencing the same significant event. However, we're all impacted in very different ways. So for some people who are living alone and having to be physically distant, I've struggled a lot this year with the term social distancing, because actually we've tried to be more social than ever. So physical distancing from my perspective, but with that we have been more, we've been further away from loved ones and friends. Potentially people have been furloughed, so kind of losing that social interaction in the workplace, or even, working remotely and trying to work while living through the events of this year. So we have seen a huge increase in people experiencing those senses of isolation. But for others who have been living in busy households, trying to work, have children who need homeschooling with multiple responsibilities, it's been quite a different experience and challenge. And actually some people have been wishing for a bit of space and alone time. We've all been creating new routines, being more aware of trying to look after ourselves too, I would say. Others have experienced bereavements and haven't been able to go through that usual process of, being able to say farewell. And of course, this situation of furlough, which has been a fantastic support mechanism for employers and employees, absolutely brilliant. However, there has still been some uncertainty for people who have experienced that, potentially returning to work, and what does that mean for the longer term as well. So this uncertainty, this insecurity and change still continues. And I think for organisations, there has been a huge focus to think about how the well-being of their employees can be looked after, as well as consideration as to how to keep engagement and motivation up for those who are either working remotely or indeed for those who have been furloughed, and trying to really keep those people feeling a continual part of the organisation. Very little planning or time for preparation was given when lockdown was announced, so we very quickly had to adapt. And of course, organisations have needed to, more now than ever, understand people's different situations to enable flexibility to meet different people's needs as well. So with all this change, with all this uncertainty, new and constant pressures, it isn't any wonder that actually some people have seen changes with regards to their mental health. Like I mentioned, I do want to underpin this section with some statistics. Okay, so some of this research I want to say is historical. So as we go through this, I just want you to consider how this might have changed over recent months. And I always caveat with any data gathering exercise that it is current at the time it was captured. So 1 in 4 adults will experience a mental health problem of some kind each year in England. So this research was completed actually back in 2007. And this is the Adult Psychiatric Morbidity in England survey, which is completed every 7 years. The second piece of research, so from 2014, 1 in 6 working age adults will experience depression, anxiety, or problems relating to stress at any one time. So the next piece of research will be due in 2021, and I would imagine that would be published in 2023. So we will see what that looks like and what the trends are and what the picture looks like for people's mental health across England. And then this cost of mental ill health to UK employers graph that I have for you here from research completed by Deloitte in 2020, published in 2020 in January, estimated that the cost of mental ill health to employers is around 42 to 45 billion pounds each year. So that's what their research showed from looking at organisations from 2018 to 2019. And this is made up of three different areas. So absenteeism, estimated at £7 billion, presenteeism between £27 and £29 billion, and the cost of staff turnover estimated at £9 billion. So a big concern that this report has presented is that the cost of presenteeism has increased quite significantly. So where people are unwell but attending work, unable to be as productive as they might ordinarily be due to a change in their mental health. And it is believed that presenteeism is becoming more of an issue due to perceived job insecurity and an increase in remote working, which can encourage, of course, people to be present rather than absent in response to poor mental health. Another piece of research completed by RAND in 2019 indicated that a lack of sleep, financial concerns, stress, and caring for relatives, as well as bullying and strained relationships at work, as well as mental health condition, can result in presenteeism. So this area is becoming a bigger concern. And with this year's events, of course, these things might have it intensified as well. And for the year 2016-2017, the cost of mental ill health to employers was estimated at £34.9 billion. So, over a couple of years or so, we've seen quite a large increase in that estimation. Okay, so what is other research telling us? So the NHS in 2016 completed some research that the total cost of mental ill health in England is £105.2 billion. And those findings indicated that actually the economy loses more than £30 billion a year from sickness, absence and unemployment caused by mental ill health, while treating mental health problems cost the NHS and social care roughly £21 billion, and the remaining about £53 billion. The financial burden sits with patients and their families, with the impact on quality of life costing £53 billion, which is quite a scary picture. The Health and Safety Executive in 2019 report that stress, depression or anxiety were responsible for 44% of all cases of work-related ill health and 54% of all working days lost due to health issues in Great Britain. And another piece of research in 2018 that 42% of employees have called in sick with a physical health issue when it was indeed a mental health issue. And this is really common to see, actually. So with any research, we can only report on what is recorded and record what is reported. So if people are calling in absent with physical health issues rather than mental health issues, then actually it's difficult to accurately capture data. So this is some historical information, so starting to build a picture. But of course, research has continued this year. So the Mental Health Foundation is leading an ongoing UK-wide long-term study of how the pandemic is affecting people's mental health. And I try to use the word pandemic as little as possible because it has been talked about so much this year. But the Mental Health Foundation leading this study, they have captured data from over 4,000 participants at regular intervals this year, starting shortly before lockdown in March, during lockdown, and with the latest data captured at the end of July, which is presented on this slide for you here. So approximately half of the population had felt anxious or worried in July when they interviews and research with the latest people. And this is actually down from 62% in March prior to lockdown. So there has been an improvement in score where people may have adjusted. But that said, half the population are still experiencing this anxiety or worry. And some of these people might already have existing mental health issues, but also for some people, this might be a completely new feeling altogether. More than 1 in 5 people, more than 1 in 5 people had felt lonely, and 1 in 6 people had felt hopeless as well. So women were more likely than men to report feeling anxious, lonely or hopeless. And again, a lot of the research does show, it does seem that women are more predisposed to experiencing mental health issues, but actually we know that women are more likely to report and talk about those feelings too. People who had a long-term mental health condition or a long-term physical health condition were more likely to report feeling anxious. And people who were unemployed were more likely to report feeling hopeless and lonely than the overall population, which is something that I think we will need to be thinking about going forward as the year progresses and as we enter into 2021. And for young people, interestingly, so for those aged between 18 to 34, there were higher rates of feeling hopeless compared to those aged over 45. 1 in 8 people had felt panicked, and generally over the course of this year, the proportion of people who have experienced suicidal thoughts or feelings was steady at approximately 10%. So again, full-time students were significantly more likely to report suicidal thoughts and feelings, and young people generally between the ages of 18 to 34 were more likely to than those in older age brackets too. Looking at the depression rates as well, so from the Office of National Statistics, again, they have been looking at these different trends. So from July 19 to March 20, 9.7% reported depression rates, and in June 2020, that going up to 19.2%. So this is almost doubled, and these are reported to be new cases of previous well people who haven't experienced a depression before. So we're really seeing these changes. Now, I do recognise that we have an international audience here. So thinking about global mental health, the World Health Organization is a fantastic resource for looking at various issues relating to health. So from that, 792 million people are affected worldwide by mental health issues. Close to 800,000 people die worldwide every year due to suicide, which is about 1 person every 40 seconds. So, mental health issues certainly isn't a local thing. It is a global thing that we all need to be thinking about. That depression is one of the leading causes of disability worldwide. And again, that globally, suicide is the second leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds behind road traffic accidents. So generally speaking, mental health conditions are increasing worldwide, and a 13% rise in mental health conditions and substance use disorders in the last decade up to 2017. So that's, again, some historic information there for you. And also the impacts on children and adolescents as well. So around 20% of the world's children and adolescents have a mental health condition. Interestingly, looking at the global average of government health expenditure that goes to mental health is less than 2%. But the most common mental health conditions, depression, anxiety, cost the global economy somewhere in the region of $1 trillion every year. Okay, so going back to my original question, why is mental health awareness now more important than ever? This year's events will have had an impact on many people, with research telling us that mental health issues are more prevalent as a result of the pandemic. For some, worlds have been turned upside down, and people will need help from their network to cope with their feelings. Friends, family, colleagues, neighbours, peers, line managers, GPs. We know that fear, worry and stress are normal responses to perceived or real threats, and at times when we're faced with uncertainty or the unknown. So actually it's it's completely normal and understandable that people have experienced fear in the context of this year's events. But added to that fear, we've experienced significant changes to our daily lives. Our movements have been restricted to support efforts to contain and slow down the spread of, this virus. Faced with new realities of working from home or attempting to work, trying to work, potentially seeing temporary unemployment, homeschooling of children, and that lack of physical contact with other family members, friends, and colleagues. And whilst we have started to see some freedoms in the UK in recent weeks, again, there is new uncertainty that we're hearing about in the news. We also know that working remotely for some has presented new challenges in relation to keeping a balance and not being able to switch off. And again, reports are telling us that some people have never worked harder, never worked more than ever previously before in their careers. So building our mental health awareness has many benefits. Being able to identify changes in ourselves and empower ourselves to maximise our own mental well-being, identifying stress early so that we can manage it and prevent it from going on for long periods of time, and really developing our own resilience. So again, research tells us that a lot of mental health issues start with stress. So if we can manage it early, identify issues early on, it can be a prevention for the longer term. So we're increasing our self-awareness, thinking about our coping mechanisms and things like that, as well as being able to identify the early signs of mental discomfort in others and have the confidence to start a conversation early on to prevent the situation from becoming worse if people don't have an insight for themselves that something has changed. And this was certainly the case in my personal experience of actually someone on the outside who said, "Sally, I can tell something's wrong. What is going on?" And that was a really empowering conversation that I could then have because I was given that safe space to then talk. So we can give people the option to talk about their experiences, where we can have a better understanding and have the skills to have an authentic conversation rather than being filled with our own worries about how to handle that conversation. And I think, Alison on Friday talked about it in her webinar on resilience and developing resilience, that actually if we are aware and others know that we're aware, then that does give some permission and security to share those vulnerabilities and ask for help, knowing that they won't be judged or criticised, but instead understood and supported. And then this, of course, tackles the stigma too that sits around mental health and talking about mental health in general. So being mental health aware is really a fantastic prevention exercise. We can prevent issues from becoming worse. We know that statutory services are stretched and it can be difficult accessing those. So again, identifying any changes early, whether it's in ourselves or others, can prevent anything from becoming worse. So we can start to move towards normalising mental health conversations and, like I said, tackling the stigma that sits around it. And I do want to note too that mental health in some places is still talked about in the wrong way. And if you could see me, I've got my inverted commas up, sitting here. So talked about in the wrong way, with many people thinking immediately of mental illness. Mental health is something that we all have, and whether we realise it or not, we are tapping into it all the time. So when we're working, when we're learning, when we're talking to each other and having conversations, when we're making decisions, concentrating, right now you'll be tapping into your mental health. But so often people think of mental health in a negative sense and actually jump to thinking of mental illness. And this too is part of stigma. So we all have mental health that is fluid and changeable, just like we all have physical health that is fluid and changeable. So we can think of mental health as sitting on a continuum. That ranges from poor mental health to positive mental health. So when we're sitting potentially at a poor mental health state, we might find it difficult to function. So actually at the positive mental health state, we can engage, we can concentrate, we can hold healthy relationships and thrive. And our mental health, of course, can sit anywhere on that mental health continuum at any point in time. So as with physical health, mental health varies by individual and is very, very fluid. Poor mental health and well-being, of course, can impact an individual's ability to thrive at work and earn a living, hold healthy relationships, be able to problem solve and resolve conflicts. So if we think about mental health in this way, that we all have it and all the factors that can potentially influence our mental health, again, raising this awareness, we can have a better appreciation as to why people might experience poor mental health. And actually, the state of our mental health has nothing to do with whether we have a diagnosis of a serious mental illness or not, because people can achieve positive mental health with a diagnosis, because they can manage symptoms and build resilience, have that self-awareness, be working towards their goals, volunteer or be employed, have those strong and healthy relationships, regulate emotions, and all these fantastic things. And we can ask ourselves various questions to ascertain where our mental health is at, which are on this slide for you here. So how do we think, feel, and behave? How do we cope with the ups and downs of everyday life? How do we feel about ourselves and our lives, and how do we see ourselves and our future? How do we deal with negative things that happen? How does stress affect us? How do we bounce back from setbacks? Can we focus, study, and concentrate? What is my self-confidence and self-esteem looking like at the moment? So actually we can use these questions and look at them, say, on a weekly basis, just to check and track the state of our mental health. And if we need to make tweaks to some of the behaviours or what we're doing, or actually we might need some rest and some downtime, then this is a fantastic way of doing that. I also want to say, though, that positive mental health isn't about being happy and positive all of the time. We're bound to experience difficulty, so with that we are bound to feel a range of emotions: sadness, anger, anxiousness, I could go on. But with that, know that it's okay that we will feel sad at times and we might feel anxious at times. If we are in a poor mental health state, our emotional response to a situation may not be appropriate, and what's appropriate will vary from person to person. And again, trying to silver line everything and see the positive in everything isn't always appropriate either. If we have experienced a loss or a bereavement, for example, my grandmother passed away, she was 95, and at least she lived a full life. And yes, she did, but I still felt sad, and that's okay. Sometimes people worry about feeling sad because they think it might mean that there's an issue with their mental health. Not at all. Feeling sad is sometimes the only appropriate response to a situation. If, however, that sadness continues for a considerable amount of time and starts to impact other areas of life, starts to impact the day-to-day, then that is where we might start to see this shift in mental health, where we might start moving towards a poor mental health state. Okay, so the return on investment on mental health initiatives and interventions. So some research, again, referring back to Deloitte back in 2017, where they did an independent review, which, the three main aims were to answer, what is the cost of mental health to employers, what is the return on investment, and what can we learn from international examples in terms of good practice. Considering everything that I've talked about already, building mental health awareness in organisations is imperative to its performance. If all members of staff are experiencing poor mental health, then we will see the performance of the organisation decline too, because people won't necessarily be as productive, may not be able to make difficult decisions, be able to focus. Challenging work might be harder to complete. Management of multiple tasks as well might be difficult to complete. But if we can be proactive in the education and upskilling of employees in mental health awareness, then again we can prevent, resulting in better organisational performance, better engagement, motivation, productivity, and generally having a workforce that feel happier. If people feel happier, they're more likely to give more and have a sense of loyalty to organisations. And as individuals, we do need to take responsibility for our own mental health. It's not just up to employers to provide the answers, but we know work is a huge component of our lives. And absolutely, it is in organisations' best interests to look after their employees' mental well-being so that they can get the best out of their people and perform. Now, the actual practice of calculating, measuring return on investment for workplace mental health programs is still in its infancy. So realistically, many organisations historically haven't measured it purely because it's felt like the right thing to do, which in itself is fantastic. That is really where we want organisations to be. But of course, if we are investing significant amounts of money, the return on investment for some organisations is very important. But employers can offer a range of activities to support individuals' personal circumstances, enabling them to take the best course of action for their mental health. And while mental health problems may not be caused by work, we of course know that people bring their whole selves to work. So supporting people appropriately is of course encouraged, as well as providing a mentally healthy workplace. So offering these activities isn't only beneficial for employees and society, but it can reduce the significant employer costs of absence, presenteeism, and staff turnover that I quoted earlier. So exploring this research then, so from an organisational culture perspective, the return on investment was found to be best when organisations look at an organisational wide approach. So first of all, thinking about organisational culture, employers that are aware of the importance of supporting mental health and emotional well-being, who have organisational culture of openness, acceptance and awareness, can achieve a return on investment of up to 8 to 1. So this can include mental health destigmatisation campaigns, so encouraging employees to share their stories, which is even more powerful when this is led from the top. So when we're seeing business leaders sharing their experiences, and it doesn't necessarily have to be related to mental health, it could be any kind of adversity or any kind of roadblock that they've had to overcome. Sharing these stories is really, really powerful, as well as mandatory training on well-being and activities to support employee resilience. So this is really kind of proactive, creating this organisational culture where talking about individual issues is well received, and that openness, acceptance and awareness, very important. Then thinking about the proactive interventions then, like providing training for employees to spot and act on signs of poor mental health in themselves and others, encouraging inclusion, and discussions about workload and working styles can result in a potential return on investment of up to 6 to 1. And this is really where the mental health awareness activities would fit. Research is telling us that when people experience mental health challenges of some kind, or some kind of emotional difficulty, they want to speak to and be supported by their peers. So building mental health awareness across the whole organisation through all levels can help to support that requirement and answer that question, who do people want to be supported by? Well, actually, they want to be supported by their peers. And then lastly, we have the reactive interventions as well. So if an employee's mental health worsens and becomes an issue over the longer term, offering things like therapy or employee assistance programs can be fantastic, with an ROI ranging up to 5 to 1. Now, it's quite interesting in some of the research around employee assistance programs that some research completed back in 2018 found that the average use of EAP services by employees was 5%. And this year, some updated research telling us that EAPs or employee assistance programs are used on average at 13%. So again, we have these fantastic tools and resources, but again, how are we building awareness of these resources, and is there anything preventing people from accessing these services to support them? There are various different activities, lots of different possibilities, and on average, the research said that for every £1 spent, the return would be £4. So that was the research in 2017. Moving to 2020 then, actually the ROI, it suggested, has gone up to an average of £5 for every £1 spent. And actually, the greater the ROI you can see is achieved in the organisational, more proactive and preventative measures rather than waiting for those reactive interventions. And of course, when we're talking about the ROI, this research really focused on reducing the costs of absence, presenteeism, and staff turnover. So actually, this hasn't necessarily considered the impact on the wider workforce, so line managers and teams, or the wider benefit to society, so thinking about reduced costs to the NHS, social and welfare costs, and of course, the opportunity for people to be at work, the greater economic opportunity because of the greater output. Okay, so making it difficult mental health conversations easier. So my first point here, make mental health part of everyday conversations. At work, we have many opportunities to speak with colleagues, line managers, and making mental health part of everyday conversations at work can further normalise these discussions. We don't have to wait for people to experience a decline in their mental health before we start talking about it. As I mentioned already, we all have mental health, so we can talk about it on a regular basis. Line managers can take the opportunity in one-to-ones to talk to their team about how they are, how they're feeling. Having a welfare section separate from the workload section, using informal catch-ups, having cups of tea together, using performance reviews or appraisals as an opportunity to talk. And teams can talk between themselves as well, whether that's in team meetings or again individually. Anecdotally, I'm aware of a few organisations who start their team meetings going around the table talking about how they're feeling with one word. So they might open the meeting with tired, anxious, positive, motivated, or sharing their mental health score on a scale. So for example, I'm a 6 out of 10 today. With everyone having a common understanding of what a 6 out of 10 would be. So making mental health part of everyday conversations would be my first tip. Acknowledge your own nervousness. So if you do have a concern about someone else and plan on speaking to them, it can feel completely natural to feel nervous. You can manage this best by acknowledging those feelings. It's okay to feel nervous. Again, that's normal. Ultimately, talking to ourselves positively and taking some deep breaths can be really helpful. So taking some deep, focused breaths. And we can also reframe the conversation in our mind in that we can focus on the goals of the conversation rather than the conversation itself. Ultimately, it will be coming from a concerned and caring place. So have confidence that you're absolutely doing the right thing. You don't have to be an expert, but creating that safe space for someone to share their thoughts and feelings is so powerful and so supportive. My next point, use I, not we statements. So when it comes to having mental health conversation, using I statements instead of we is of paramount importance. So this will prevent any concerns around, well, who is we? If someone is, talking about their experiences and we're saying, oh, we are concerned about you, then this can cause, trust issues, cause people to shut down and not actually share what's going on for them because they feel like there are conversations going on elsewhere. And lastly, be mindful of body language. So sometimes we can underestimate the impacts of our body language. So it's important to bear in mind that our body language needs to be congruent with our verbal cues. So keeping a calm and confident exterior can be reassuring. Consider all of the good practices around warm eye contact and focus, not being distracted by looking at watches or phones, which can be quite common, and remaining completely neutral. And again, if someone tells us something quite shocking, remaining neutral to that and not acting shocked, again, is really important because people might feel judged if we react in some way. We, of course, want to appear engaged, interested, and respectful. So thinking about, open arms rather than crossed, facing the person but comfortably, so at a 90-degree angle. And then again, be aware of any kind of nail biting or hair behind ear tucking, leg shifting, foot tapping, because again, that can be a distraction or feel like actually, oh, do you have time for me? You're tapping your foot. So make mental health part of everyday conversations, acknowledge your own nervousness, use I, not we statements, and be mindful of body language. And so then moving on to top tips on starting positive and empowering mental health related conversations at work. So my first top tip is around choosing a setting. So a time and place where you won't be distracted or interrupted, a private space where someone would feel most comfortable, that allows for privacy and confidentiality. And everyone is individual, so this will look different to different people. If we are back in offices, a meeting room booking, having a cup of tea or grabbing a bite of lunch together, or going for a walk and talk. Actually, walk and talks are really powerful ways to have open conversations. And actually, therapists are starting to use this rather than sitting in the chairs opposite one another. It's a far less intimidating conversation walking side by side. Of course, there is a lot of remote working going on too, so it could look like a video call, a voice call, or even, again, a walk and talk over the phone. Again, be mindful if you're at home in a busy household, be mindful of who can hear your conversation as well. So always thinking about that privacy and confidentiality. Again, avoiding interruptions, so switching off phones and giving someone that full attention. And like I've already said, these conversations don't have to be an event all on their own. We can start to build these conversations into other day-to-day conversations so it becomes a normal part of everyday life and not just when we notice a problem or a change. Ask about feelings. This is my second top tip for you. So when it comes to any conversation about mental health or any emotional distress, we want to talk about feelings. So many mental health issues can manifest themselves in different ways, and we can start to see changes in behaviour and physical appearance. But ultimately, there will be something underlying going on. People don't behave out of character for the sake of it. Quite often, behaviour is communication of something going on. So if someone is usually, for example, sociable and outgoing, and you notice a change to a quieter disposition, or someone is usually quiet and you start to see anger and frustration, there could be something going on for them. So we talk about feelings as a starting point. It is quite common for people to say that they're fine when they're not feeling fine. And if you do feel like you're not getting anywhere with the conversation, then that is when you can start to reflect back on observed changes, so these facts. I wondered how you're feeling because I've noticed that you seem quieter than usual and withdrawn, so I'm a bit worried about you. Is there anything going on at the moment that you'd like to share with me? So being really soft in that approach, always talking about feelings, but we can reflect back those facts if indeed we feel like we're not getting anywhere with the conversation. Or I've noticed you're arriving late. Is everything okay? So again, completely keeping any judgment out of it. And then lastly, listen non-judgmentally. One of the biggest problems in communication is listening or a lack thereof. When we go through schooling, we aren't taught how to listen. We're told to listen a lot, but we're not taught how to listen. And quite often we want to fix people's issues. We're human. We want to provide solutions. And that itself can prevent us from listening properly. So the best thing that we can do sometimes is listen, give someone our full focus and attention, and keep any advice that we might have to ourselves. And if we're in our thoughts of, oh, this could be a solution, or here's a piece of advice, when we're thinking about that, actually we're not giving that person our full focus and we stopped listening. And this takes practice. It's like any skill, it takes practice. Silence and giving the person space to talk and to be truly heard by you is sometimes all that someone needs. A space to vent, get things off their chest. They're not looking for advice, not looking for solutions. And as Stephen Covey says, the author of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, seek to understand before seeking to be understood. I think that's such a powerful thing that we can keep in mind all the time. And to effectively support someone being non-judgmental is a top priority. We want to have an attitude of acceptance and empathy, really truly accepting someone's feelings and experiences for what they are, no matter how trivial they may seem to us. Whatever they're experiencing is real for them. So we need to keep the conversation positive, saying things like, there's nothing to worry about, get over it, I don't really understand what you've got to be sad about, pull yourself together, of course, can be really, really damaging, and again, break down the trust and cause people not to open up about what they're feeling. So those 3 top tips on starting positive, empowering mental health related conversations at work: choose a setting, ask about feelings, and listen non-judgmentally. So to recap, that really does bring us to the end of the content. Why is mental health awareness now more important than ever? Thinking about the uncertainty and change that this year has brought, and really having a look at some of this data and insights to underpin that. We all have mental health, and we can all expect to experience some kind of change, and whether that means we move into a poor mental health state or not is very different for different people. We have looked at the return on investment on mental health initiatives, so that's Deloitte research, making difficult mental health conversations easier, as well as the final top tips on starting positive mental health conversations. So thinking about that setting, asking about feelings, and listening. There is further education and development opportunities coming up, but I will hand over to Rob now for him to talk to you about that.
Thank you, Sally. Excellent webinar. What we'll do, we'll come to some questions in a bit. As you can see on the screen there, everyone, we've got some courses coming up over the next couple of months or so. So mental health awareness in October, mental health first aid in October as well, and building resilience in a time of change in November. So again, you can access these via our website. If you go onto IMechE.org and click on the training tab, that can then give you access to the training calendar, and those will therefore be in there. So questions. So thank you all for sending in some questions. We've got a few. I'd also first like to say thank you to a number of you who have actually answered some of the questions as they've been more moving forward, especially Nancy and Russell with some excellent answers on there. We've got 3 or 4 questions that I've picked up on, Sally. The first one is regarding some of the graphs you showed right at the start. Do you think the increase from 34 billion to 45 billion is due to having more cases, or just reflects that we are more aware of such issues now?
I think that's a really fantastic question, and in honesty, I would say it's both things. So there is more awareness, people are more willing to talk about their experiences, but we also know that there's a rise in mental health conditions. And it was really the presenteeism statistics, the figures around presenteeism, that has seen a significant increase between 2016-17 and the later statistics as well from 2018-2019. So it's the self-reported presenteeism where we've seen I think it's something like a £7 to £8 billion increase in presenteeism reporting. But probably a mix of both of those things.
Thank you. Next one is a question: is how far can an employer go to support mental health, as it requires awareness, raising the issue, and an employee has a right to privacy, which may make any conversation approach difficult?
Again, another fantastic question. I think employers being proactive in looking after the mental health of their staff is really imperative, and we've gone through that content as to why, but you're absolutely right that privacy is important. And so for some people, if they do share their experience but actually don't want to go into detail and know how they manage their mental health and know how they stay well, then actually, interventions by the employer might not be needed because people might be managing their mental health all by themselves. There are so many fantastic resources that employers can access in terms of, wellbeing action plans. Some organisations use those for, as part of induction processes. So really, when new people are coming in, they're seeing this culture of, actually, every new joiner has a wellbeing action plan. So, and this has a mix of what can the employer do, but actually what do you do as an individual? What do you do to keep mentally well? What responsibilities do you take? And actually what might be your triggers at work to experiencing a decline in your mental health as well. But the privacy aspect is absolutely important. And I suppose it depends how mental health issues also manifest themselves in workplaces. Again, like I say, some people are completely aware, know exactly what they do to need to keep well. But of course, if someone's experiencing poor mental health and it's starting to impact relationships, or you're seeing conflict, or there's a general concern, then absolutely organisations do need to have that awareness to have those empowering conversations.
Excellent, thank you, Sally. Next question. As a large percentage of mental health issues are in the younger age groups, do you feel that training in personal resilience would be well placed in the national curriculum? And is there currently any training conducted in schools/colleges?
Another fantastic question. Absolutely. I'm a great believer in starting to build resiliency and coping skills in our younger population. We are seeing that younger people are disproportionately affected by mental health conditions. So yes, definitely would be fantastic to see that in the national curriculum. And I think at the moment it's an optional thing that we're seeing in schools around lessons on feelings and coping skills and things like that. Is there training being conducted in schools, further education, colleges? Yes, I mean, from a mental health first aid perspective, teachers are being trained to identify different signs and symptoms in young people. But again, it's not necessarily mandatory. But it is good practice, and the law is changing in 2025, where all educational establishments have to have a mental health lead in their organisation. So I think between now and then we will start to see a move and a change in more educational establishments having more mental health awareness training.
Excellent answer again, Sally. Next one, could you talk a bit more about the difference between the reactive and proactive interventions in relation to how and when such interventions can be provided?
Okay, so the proactive intervention, so the mental health awareness training, so building awareness among the population. So as an example, if we have mental health awareness, we might be able to identify the early signs of some kind of distress. So particularly when people are feeling stressed in the workplace, we might start to notice these changes. So if we can have those conversations early on, then that's much more preventative than actually waiting and not identifying an issue, and then someone experiences stress for a long period of time. It could then develop into a mental health issue, at which point they might need some deeper counselling. So that's more of the reactive, so almost waiting for an issue to come about before we provide support, whereas the preventative is at the earlier stage before things worsen. Does that answer the question?
I hope so. I'm sure we'll get a reply if not. The final one I have here, I think, unless some more have appeared, I think this relates to your sort of last section of your presentation. It said, what about high stress jobs and burnout?
High stress jobs and burnout. Thank you. So when it comes to presenteeism, again, the research is telling us that people in highly stressful occupations are more likely to present, and this, of course, can result in burnout. So again, I think the piece around resiliency, finding those coping mechanisms, being kind to ourselves, and actually stopping. But I don't think there is an easy answer, and I think it really depends on the individual, the organisational culture, and again being able to be open about, actually I'm starting to feel really exhausted, and again recognising those signs in ourselves to potentially make some of those changes. I'm not sure if that really answers the question, but we know that burnout is a huge issue. And I think, again, looking at those early warning signs, having that self-awareness can be very empowering for people to manage that.
Excellent, thank you, Sally. And I think that's the end of the questions that were asked and appeared in the chat section over the last sort of hour or so. So if you want to hand over to you just to finish off.
Thank you. I've been really delighted to attend this. So thank you again, everyone, for attending, for your time and attention. Very much appreciated. If there are any questions outside that come to you afterwards, then please pass those through to me. Thank you.
Brilliant. Again, thank you everyone for attending. Thank you for your questions and your interactions. Thank you, Sally, for an excellent webinar. And again, please feel free to go and access the IMechE.org website and the training section. In there, you'll be able to find out that the upcoming courses, as I mentioned, plus a number of other courses and information that we do. Plus, in there, you'll be able to find how to access this webinar when it's released in a couple of days, but also to able to access any of the webinars we've done over the last number of years, including the Resilience webinar that Alison did so excellently last week. And again, thank you for attending, and I wish you a good day.